April 13, 1992 Observer Newsletter Good, Bad, Ugly at Mania 92, Warrior Back, Scandals Update, and more. By Observer Staff. Wrestlemania VIII. Thumbs up 160 votes, 44.0%. Thumbs down 118 votes, 32.5%. In the middle 85 votes, 23.4%. Best match poll. Ric Flair vs. Randy Savage 231 votes. Roddy Piper vs. Bret Hart 52 votes. Worst match poll. Ted DiBiase and IRS vs. Natural Disasters 103 votes. Hulk Hogan vs. Sid Justice 91 votes. Owen Hart vs. Skinner 44 votes. 8-man tag match 25. Tatanka vs. Rick Martel 21. Based on phone calls and fax messages to the Observer as of Monday afternoon. Margin of error, 100%. Since WrestleMania is the biggest show of the year in this country, we might as well start here. The show drew a crowd reported by the WWF as 62,167 to the Hoosier Dome in Indianapolis. It was heavily papered, although no word on how heavily. The live gate was right around $1.25 million. They must have scaled down a lot of tickets at the end, because I believe they'll announce 54,000 paid. And they had topped the $1 million mark before they had sold 30,000 tickets, which, if true, would mean an average of $10 per ticket sold in the final few weeks. It would be the fourth largest live gate for pro wrestling ever in North America. A full house was originally scaled at $2.5 million as compared with the $3.45 million for the Toronto Wrestlemania, with the same basic-sized crowd. It was nowhere near, dollar-wise, what the big stadium shows in Japan have done. But on this continent, it trails only Wrestlemania V, Hogan vs. Warrior from Toronto, Wrestlemania V, Hogan vs. Savage from Trump Plaza, and Wrestlemania III, Hogan vs. Andre from Pontiac, Michigan. Paid attendance probably hovered around the fourth highest ever in North America, although obviously the show came nowhere close to the 72,000 paid that had been talked about for several months. The crowd, while relatively quiet for most of the matches, looked impressive enough on camera with few enough empty seats in the place to give the impression that aspect of the show was a big success. Very preliminary figures indicate a substantial drop from last year's WrestleMania on pay-per-view, which had to be a major disappointment. The buy rate estimates early are ranging from a $2.6, $14.1 million, down to a $2.1, $11.3 million. The drop from last year, which itself was a disappointment considering it was a big drop from the previous year blamed on the war angle touching the wrong kind of a nerve with casual buyers, is being blamed on the recession. In the dark match, the Bushwhackers beat the Beverly Brothers in approximately 10 o'clock. While it wasn't a good match, it turned out to be better than half of the matches that did take place. 1 star. 1. Shawn Michaels pinned Tito Santana in 10:38. While not a bad match by any means, it was disappointing considering the talent level involved. Michaels stalled early and spent most of the rest of the match on the mat with a side headlock put on him. Michaels got the advantage, tossing Santana over the top rope, and kept up for 3 minutes. Santana, the only man except for Hogan to be in every WrestleMania, hit several flying forearms in a comeback with Michaels going to the floor. Michaels basically did a Kurt Hennig imitation in the last minute of the match with the wild bumps. Finish saw Santana try to body slam Michaels in from the apron. Michaels held onto the ropes and fell on him for the pin. 2 stars. Next up was an interview with Legion of Doom and new and old manager Paul Ellering. The interview was way too long and it didn't seem like many people knew who Ellering was. Legion of Doom didn't seem to have a definite program or purpose for the interview other than to debut Ellering and make it clear they've returned. 2. Undertaker pinned Jake Roberts in 6:39. Considering this was probably the third most anticipated match on the show, it was real bad. Undertaker sold nothing early and did his choking. Roberts hit the DDT twice, but both times Undertaker popped back up. Finish saw Roberts go after Paul Bearer on the floor. Undertaker got out of the ring and gave Roberts the tombstone piledriver on the floor and threw him into the ring to be pinned. 3/4 1 star. 3. Bret Hart pinned Roddy Piper to regain the Intercontinental title in 13:50. Really good. They did an excellent job of getting their personalities over without turning either one. Hart bled a lot, which may have been accidental, but it did add a lot of drama to the match. The match built well before the ref bump. Piper clotheslined Hart to the floor and gave him a good shot to the ring steps. Piper then brought the ring bell to the ring and paused forever deciding whether or not to hit Hart, but eventually didn't, keeping him a strong babyface in the eventual defeat. Piper then put on the sleeper. Hart kicked off the turnbuckle and fell backward onto Piper for the pin. 3 1/2 stars. Next up was an interview with Lex Luger. I believe the interview was actually done that morning in Indianapolis and spliced into the show rather than done via split screen from Atlanta, as it was purported as being. Luger is the key in bridging the wrestling audience to become a bodybuilding audience. More on the bodybuilding later, but by 1993 Luger will become either the most over or the second most over person working for Titan Sports with his dual role in both promotions. 4. Virgil and Big Boss Man and Jim Duggan and Sergeant Slaughter beat Nasty Boys and Repo Man and Mountie in 6:31. Ray Combs of Family Feud did the ring announcing, since Titan is sending a team of heel wrestlers to oppose babyface bodybuilders on Family Feud very shortly. He was kind of annoying, but the ring announcing was still the best part of the match. Finish saw the heels get the noseguard off Virgil. Knobbs held Virgil while Sags went to hit him with the noseguard. Virgil moved. Sags hit Knobbs and Virgil pinned him. The match wasn't good, but nobody expected it to be. But at least it wasn't painful to watch. 1/4 1 star. 5. Randy Savage pinned Ric Flair in 1802 to win the WWF Championship. This was expected to be the match of the show and it lived up to it. The purported centerfold photo of Elizabeth that Titan was using as a lure to get last-minute buys never materialized. Savage attacked Flair early with Mr. Perfect saving Flair from the early beating. Flair took all his bumps for the first 2 minutes before backdropping Savage over the top rope and Savage taking the bump like a Mexican wrestler. Flair kept the advantage for the next several minutes. The only negative about the work were that a lot of Savage's clotheslines looked real bad and Flair sold them like they weren't. Savage came off the top rope to the floor with a double sledge and Flair juiced after hitting his head on the guardrail. Savage suplexed him on the floor. Savage then hit the elbow off the top rope, but Mr. Perfect interfered right in front of the ref and pulled Savage off. Then came the ref bump. Perfect gave Flair a foreign object and he hit Savage, but Savage kicked out. I'll bet 90% of the people watching thought that was going to be the real finish. Perfect then attacked Savage's knee and Elizabeth came to ringside with Shane McMahon, Dave Heckner, Rene Goulet, Jay Strongbow and J.J. Dillon. That's who they told me it was. I've watched the tape 3 times and still don't believe it, since it looked like a taller Jim Barnett, blocking the view of all those nice folks who paid $125 for ringside during the hottest part of the best match on the show to act like they didn't want to hear that. Flair got the figure 4 on. Savage reversed it. In the ensuing melee, Savage schoolboyed Flair using the tights and got the pin. Flair kissed Elizabeth, who started slapping him, after the match. Savage jumped on Flair and Perfect jumped on Savage and the gang in suits all jumped on everyone and got jumped on and everyone was jumping on everyone. Doesn't this sound like now it can be told all over again? Well, at least this time, JJ did get to watch. 4 1/4 stars. At this point there was no way this card could have been a thumbs down. But it might as well have ended here because the best thing on the show after this point was either the intermission or the British Bulldog vs Berserker match that didn't take place because they were running late on time. 6. Tatanka pinned Rick Martel in 4:33 with a crossbody block. The ring entrance with all the Indians dancing was longer than the match, and it didn't get over either. Martel carried him and it wasn't bad. 1 1/4 stars. 7. Natural Disasters beat Money Incorporated, Ted DiBiase and IRS, via countout in 8:37, so Money Incorporated keeps the WWF Tag Team titles. Oh, was this bad? Disasters aren't over as faces one lick and worked so badly that the crowd didn't have a lick of interest in the match. Typhoon was far worse than usual, which is a mouthful. Typhoon splashed IRS and Jimmy Hart pulled him out of the ring and they walked back to the dressing room for the countout loss. The fans in the building, who no matter how many times they see this, have always in the past popped for the core thinking the title changed hands, didn't care one iota. Horrible match and an even worse finish. -2 stars. 8. Owen Hart pinned Skinner in 109 with a reverse rolling cradle. Hart looks ridiculous in that ring outfit. Best move of the match was Hart's ring entrance. Dud. 9. Hulk Hogan beat Sid Justice via DQ in 12:29. You know Hogan is really something special when he can be in a match, like this one or the one with Andre, which is totally devoid of anything, and still just by his charisma get interest in the match. Not that this wasn't horrible because it had to be one of the 3 worst main event matches in pay-per-view history. After an opening flurry, there was a 2-minute stall, a test of strength that never ended, an interminable nerve hold, and the first wrestling move of the match came at 10:30, which was a side slam followed by a powerbomb that Hogan kicked out of and made the Superman comeback. Hogan had perhaps the worst looking foot to the face he's done in a long time, followed by the body slam and leg drop. Justice kicked out and the ref called for an immediate DQ because Harvey Whippleman got in the ring. Papa Shango did the run-in to lead to the return of a slimmed-down Ultimate Warrior who made the save, in gear, complete with entrance music and all. -2 stars. Overall, I'd give the show a thumbs in the middle. On a 10-match show, we had one match that didn't even take place, which almost nobody complained about, which tells you how much people were looking forward to that match. 6 bad matches, 1 decent match and 2 very good to excellent matches. That sounds almost like it should be a thumbs down, and when I think about the show logically it should be, but it wasn't bad. It was an impressive production, and the big crowd makes a difference in making you think this is a special event. For those who enjoyed the show specifically because of the juice, consider yourself fortunate. It didn't represent a change in policy by the WWF. It was a combination of an accident and miscommunication, and don't expect it to happen again because McMahon doesn't believe in the juice. They had a post-match media press conference with Savage and Warrior. Supposedly Hogan refused to attend, with mainly puff questions considering most of the news of late. Savage did admit to steroid use in the past but said he was glad to be off it because it gave him PMS. Nobody broached the subject with Warrior, who unlike Savage, did the interview totally out of character. He talked about being a chiropractic student before being a wrestler, said his name was Jim Hellwig and that when he goes home he puts the Warrior costume away. Warrior is back full-time, and yes, it is the same Ultimate Warrior as before, and there is a long-term plan for him. Jake Roberts quit before the show, which explains the burial in the second match. He left for what apparently were non-business related reasons, and at least gave the impression that he'd be back before the end of the summer. Another point needs to be made, and that is that this was the closest thing ever to a steroid-free pay-per-view pro wrestling show from any company. Everyone, well, I'm told there were 2 exceptions, looked to be off the stuff, as compared with the last pay-per-view when more than half of the guys looked to be on. Right now the onus is there to stay that way and on WCW to follow suit. The post-WrestleMania cards consist of one show being comprised largely of Savage Flair return title matches, with the top 2 underneath matches being Undertaker vs. Papa Shango. These guys may work together better than it sounds on paper since they are good friends in real life, and Money Incorporated vs. Natural Disaster. The top 3 matches on the other show will be Warrior vs. Justice, Bret Hart vs. Michaels, and Legion of Doom vs. Beverly Brothers. Some of the underneath early summer marriages to round out the shows will be Tatanka vs. Colonel Mustafa, Virgil vs. Berserker, Kerry Von Erich vs. Skinner, Chris Walker vs. Bob Bradley, Sergeant Slaughter vs. Mountie, Repo Man vs. Bulldog, Santana vs. Martel, Owen Hart vs. Jim Power, Bossman vs. Convict, to kick in a few months down the line, not right away, and Nasty Boys vs. Kato and Crush. And now it's time for the rest of the story. Friday's Now It Can Be Told feature on the WWF and its sex scandal was far and away the most brutal major media feature on the subject thus far. While the show's overall accuracy and journalistic standards were actually better than every show that has covered the subject, there are 2 factors that will lead to this being not particularly damaging by itself. First off, the show is only in a limited number of markets. Second, the show's reputation isn't the best and is considered tabloid fare even when serious news is broached. The show brought forth 2 new names in the WWF sex scandal, both former referees, Michael Clark and Rita Chatterton, who refereed in 1985 through 86 as Rita Marie. Chatterton's story painted a horrible portrait of Vince McMahon, claiming McMahon promised her the world and talked of a cover on Time magazine and a $500,000 income in exchange for sexual favors. Chatterton spoke of an encounter in McMahon's limousine on July 16, 1986, in which she claimed in a tearful television interview that McMahon physically forced sexual intercourse on her. Chatterton claimed by refusing to acquiesce to McMahon's desires that her bookings as a referee ceased. She said the reason it took her nearly 6 years to come forward was because her parents weren't in the best of health and didn't want to put them through what assuredly would be a stressful legal fight since her name would be run through the mud. Both of her parents have now passed away, her father passing away just a few weeks ago, and the combination of that and everyone else coming forward is why she claims she came forward with these charges. She admits to telling others in the wrestling business about them back in 1986. One of the people she told, one of the industry's biggest names, told us Friday night about a conversation with Chatterton right after the alleged incident, which corroborates some but contradicts other aspects of the story. The statute of limitations has expired in this case both as far as a legal or a civil tort for the alleged act is concerned. However, her attorney, Robert Wolf of New York, is pursuing litigation on the case based on his ability to prove this wasn't an isolated incident but a constant pattern within the company. Chatterton passed a lie detector test about 2 weeks ago in regards to the story she told on Now, according to Wolf. Her story was fully corroborated on the record by Joe Stewart, who was the driver of the limo, on Monday. Stewart, who has a lawsuit against McMahon and in the complaint alleges immoral and illegal acts having taken place in McMahon's limousines, said he was driving the limo the night the alleged incident took place. Vince McMahon and the WWF refused to respond to appear on the Now show to address the charges the show brought out and have been unable to be reached for comments since the show aired due to WrestleMania. Clark, who appeared on the show along with Murray Hodgson, Bruno Sammartino, and Barry Orton, told a story about how he claimed he was let go as a referee by the WWF after refusing a homosexual advance from Terry Garvin. The WWF is just filth, lies and cheaters. They'll step on anyone's toes to get what they want. Clark, who worked for the WWF for 3.5 years, claimed that Garvin asked him if he could perform oral sex on him. In exchange, Garvin said he'd get him booked as a referee throughout Canada, get him a green card so he could work in the United States, and also give him $500. Clark said that when he refused, his career with the WWF was over. Clark claimed there was a crew of referees and ring boys who were doing sexual favors for management, headed by Garvin and Pat Patterson, that were known as the Cream Team. Clark called Mel Phillips the sickest of the three. Garvin and Patterson resigned in the wake of the scandal, and Phillips was suspended shortly thereafter. Another ex-WWF wrestler confirmed the Cream Team name and said it first started as a joke, a takeoff on the Dream Team, a tag team of Greg Valentine and Brutus Beefcake, who were WWF Tag Team Champions when the moniker came out, but soon everyone realized it was something that wasn't fun. Clark, who came off as extremely believable in the piece, said that he knew of a few wrestlers who got their jobs through sexual favors. The show also made it seem quite clear that McMahon was aware of all of this. Hodgson spoke of his meeting with McMahon, which occurred after he was fired, when he said he brought up the exchange with Patterson at the Worcester Centrum and McMahon brushed him off. He felt I was some little peon who was just going to get kicked under the rug because they didn't do what Vince McMahon wanted them to do. Clark followed, saying that he was warned about Patterson and Garvin the very first day he was in the wrestling business, and said that everyone in the wrestling business knew about them, so there was no way McMahon couldn't have. The show was banned, because of a court injunction, from airing the interview with Tom Cole, the ring boy who is back working with the WWF after settling his grievance a few weeks ago. However, they quoted from Cole's affidavit as part of the injunction banning the interview. The interviews contain graphic description of sexual abuse I received between the ages of 13 and 19, most between 13 and 16, and has left me emotionally scarred. The program was meant to be a go for the jugular investigation, and it clearly was exactly that. However, with such an abundance of material on the subject, the report was hurt credibility-wise in a few parts because of the use of speculative charges, particularly the insinuation during the show that Patterson and Garvin were still working for the company. Both Sammartino and Hodgson said basically that if they were to guess, they believed both were still working for the WWF. While I can't dispute that point, it was speculation of the type that neither knew about and really didn't need to be part of the piece. The show also gave the ridiculous $1.7 billion figure for WWF's gross annual revenue, and that it takes in more money than the NFL, and said Vince McMahon single-handedly took wrestling from smoke-filled rooms to family rooms. In addition, Barry Orton's story was edited to make it seem like the story of Garvin hitting on him was something recent, when it was actually in 1978 and before either Orton or Garvin were working for the WWF. While Orton's story is valid, in fairness, it needs to be put in its proper context. Hodgson, a former disc jockey based out of Detroit who was hired to do event centers and World Bodybuilding Federation events, basically take over Sean Mooney's duties, after a year-long talent search by the WWF, has claimed many times he was fired for not doing sexual favors for Pat Patterson, and has a lawsuit against Titan out in this regard. McMahon claimed Hodgson was fired because he couldn't make the transition from radio to television. But if Hodgson hasn't proved anything else thus far, he has proven the ridiculousness of that statement, although that doesn't necessarily confirm the Patterson incident as the reason for the termination. He displayed exceptional television presence and camera savvy, even beyond that of McMahon, on Donahue, and followed it up with an even stronger presence on this show. Hodgson, who was used as the focal point tying together most of the charges, even talked of allegations of animals being abused and killed and the steroid used to contradict the WWF's self-proclaimed family entertainment image. The latter two charges were never delved into for the remainder of the program. Even with its minor flaws, the piece was worlds better than the piece the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather aired that same day. The CBS piece ran down some of the major charges and basically rehashed stories that have been reported elsewhere. It was basically a case of lazy journalism with little investigating and just going with a few surface stories. The investigation was lighthearted, but still very damaging, concentrating on the charge that midget wrestler Karate Kid was blackballed for not acquiescing to a homosexual advance and the Hulk Hogan steroid connection. There were also major and unforgivable factual errors, such as that there hadn't been one arrest nor lawsuit filed related to any of these charges to make them seem unsubstantial. In fact, there have been numerous drug arrests of WWF wrestlers, including a fairly high-profile drug trial of the company's most well-known pusher. In addition, 2 wrestlers had been busted for drugs just in the previous 9 weeks. There have also been 3 lawsuits filed related to the topics talked about, and most unforgivably, 2 of the lawsuits were filed by Hodgson and superstar Billy Graham, both of whom appeared in the piece. It also stated that WrestleMania was going to sell out, when it was no secret within the industry that the show was being heavily papered because the advance didn't indicate they could come close to filling the building. Pro wrestling itself took its lumps in the piece, being called a hideous combination of sideshow, acrobatics and good guy versus evil. Even though all of these charges, with the exception of the steroids which cuts across wrestling and many other sports, were limited to the WWF, the piece never differentiated between the WWF and the rest of wrestling, and the whole industry was indicted to a highbrow audience. But no matter how serious the charge, the story was always kept tongue-in-cheek. Hogan came off the worst of anyone, with the narration saying that what Hogan preaches is apparently not what he practiced. This was followed by David Schultz saying Hogan took steroids like he drank water and mentioned injecting him hundreds of times. Hogan, as with every article on the subject, refused to be interviewed to respond to the piece. McMahon appeared, however, and called all the allegations absurd and tried to call it a conspiracy. What was absurd was for CBS, even with the time restraints of a 4.5-minute piece that ended the newscast and was plugged throughout the day Thursday and throughout the newscast Friday, for CBS to air a blanket statement regarding so many different charges. Clearly the evidence is more than overwhelming concerning the drug charges. There is an awful lot of corroboration that sex abuse and harassment in some form had taken place. How prevalent it was is the question. Although Titan hasn't publicly admitted to it, from all accounts the Tom Cole story appears to have a lot of validity. To pardon the pun, the jury is out on a few of the other cases. All these charges have to be taken individually, not collectively. It wouldn't surprise me at all to find out that some stories may lack credibility, but we've now had 11 or 12 different people come forward, 4 or 5 who admitted abuse as ring boys, 3 wrestlers regarding harassment, 1 announcer and 2 referees, and another who claims to have witnessed at least one of the encounter. CBS did echo what it called the crescendo of opinions that Congress ought to investigate the industry, but again, in a tongue-in-cheek manner. While airing so many charges on such a widely viewed and so-called credible news program was quite damaging to the entire industry as a whole, more sponsors are now steering clear of wrestling in general because of the bad publicity. Unfortunate because there are many innocent parties being victimized because this piece painted the entire industry with one brush when most of these charges related to just one company in the industry. However, in many ways the segment tried to trivialize them by downplaying their importance because the fans couldn't care less. I somehow think that if the NFL or NHL had a similar situation, and their stadiums stayed full, which they would, that the CBS Evening News wouldn't do the story tongue-in-cheek and trivialize it because live attendance won't suffer. Many years ago in this area there was a college basketball superstar, Quinton Daly of USF, who was eventually convicted of raping a co-ed, and many in the university conspired to cover the story up. This was well known on campus but hidden from the news media for months, but the basketball games still drew packed houses and the enthusiasm for Daly never waned. Even after it went public, the attendance and enthusiasm stayed high, although the cover-up did turn out to be such an embarrassment to the school that the basketball program was dropped for a few years over it. I don't recall one media story about the incident even bringing up that Daly was never booed during games, or that in fact, fans would bring banners to the game denouncing his accuser, that fans didn't stop coming to games, or that enthusiasm never waned. Nor did the local or national media, when the story broke, use any of those facts as an excuse to not cover the story. The Allentown Morning Call also had a major story on Friday about the allegations made by Sammartino and Graham on Donahue and King involving the alleged incident involving Mel Phillips talked about on both shows. The WWF never responded to this story as well. Graham said he was awaiting a match at the Agricultural Hall where the WWF taped its television shows at the time, when 2 security guards escorted the employee, Phillips, into the dressing room. I was sitting practically 2 feet from Vince McMahon Sr. and Jr. when security guards brought him, Phillips, in, Graham said. I saw the guards hand Phillips over to the McMahons. The guards told the McMahons about the situation in the parking lot and the McMahons said, "We'll take care of it." The security guards left and Phillips made his exit in an opposite direction. Graham also said in the story, "I assumed that the McMahons would take control of the situation and either fire Phillips or suspend him. I felt it wasn't necessary for me personally to be involved with a police report. I didn't discover him. I didn't see the act. I wasn't involved. It wasn't up to me. I just assumed that the WWF would take the proper steps to see that it never happened again." Graham said he saw Phillips at the next taping and it was like nothing had happened. There is a flaw in this story. Graham said it happened in either 1982 or 1983, while Sammartino pegged it as between 1978 and 1981, although he admitted he could be wrong about the date. However, by 1982, Sammartino was no longer a part of the WWF. He returned in late 1984.
Roddy Piper refutes scandal charges.
A transcription of Roddy Piper's comments regarding the negative publicity the WWF has suffered on KSAC radio in Sacramento on March 30th. Ted Green, host, I want to talk to you about all the controversy that seems to be dropping on the head of Vince McMahon and the World Wrestling Federation. What is going on with charges of steroids with Hulk Hogan and sexual abuse? What in the world is happening to your sport? RP, this is the way I feel about that, Ted. You know, there are all these allegations against McMahon as a steroid thing. Well, first of all, it was part of the steroid thing. Let me tell you folks, let me clear it up. Yes, I did it. When did I do it? With a doctor when it was legal. Why did I do it? To improve myself.
Is it good?
No, kids, you'll die if you do it, but you've got to try it.
Some people can't seem to let that thing go.
I don't know why.
Ted, let me ask you something.
If I was to give you this cup of coffee and the doctor said it was okay and it would make you the best sports announcer in town, would you drink it? TG Roddy, I hate coffee. RP, you hate coffee. But would you drink it if it made you $1 million bucks?
TG, would I be better than Al Michaels?
RP, you already are better than Al Michaels.
TG, I'll take it with sweet and low.
RP, of course you would.
TG, but wait a second, coffee's not the same thing as steroids.
Come on. RP, no, it's not the same thing, but I'll tell you, you need to drink your little cup of coffee to get up in the morning and whatever you're doing. What I'm saying is with the steroid thing, they're talking about something that happened a year and a half ago that was legal under a doctor's care. How much are you guys going to beat this into the ground?
TG, I just want to ask you some straight questions like how many of you guys take steroids?
What percentage of the wrestlers do it? RP, nobody's taking steroids now. We're being tested. The last 8 days probably 2 times.
2 times every 8 days, 9 days, it's a surprise test all the time, so nobody's taking steroids now.
The ones that were taking it, they got whatever they were at when they had the first test. As long as they keep coming down, they're okay. If not, they're fired.
It's simple.
We found out steroids kill you. Don't take them. It's finished. You don't need them to be a great wrestler. TG Roddy, what about the charges of sexual abuse in the World Wrestling Federation? This stuff is going out on Donahue, Oprah, Geraldo. RP, brother, I know what you're saying.
Donahue, right?
Had all these accusations.
On the panel, there was Vince McMahon, then there was superstar Billy Graham, who used to break legs for the mob, Barry Orton, who is an ex-con, and Billy Jack Haynes, I believe, was there, who is an ex-con, some guy who said he phoned McMahon in 1985, and there was a guy on there who had a pretty good demeanor, who said he was an announce, right? He got flown in 4 times and the people kind of popped for him. Remember that? And then Vince said something like, let's bring up some of the past, and Donahue said, no, we're talking about this issue. You know what that past was? TG, what's that, Roddy? RP, that guy's gay. TG, you're kidding. RP, that brings a whole new light to it, doesn't it, Ted? Not only that, Vince never auditioned this guy. He left it to Bruce Pritchard, and then once Vince saw him, he said, he's lousy. Get him out of here. And that's the truth. But the public just wants to hammer on us. But you know what? I've been in 7 fights in 7 days and they're all sold out. So another one's credibility totally bites the dust. Almost every point Piper made here has turned out to be false, some of which could have been honest mistakes, and a few of which were outright lies. Steroids were not legal in many cases when wrestlers were using them. Possession didn't become a federal crime until early 1991, but use in wrestling didn't drop 1 iota when that law changed. While Piper did get his steroids from a doctor, Zahor Ian, in the trial he admitted Zahor Ian offered him no medical advice on them. In addition, Piper admitted in the Zahor Ian trial having steroid packages mailed to him in California in 1990, where possession of steroids was very much illegal, as it was by 1988 in 13 states including Florida, where many of the WWF's biggest stars lived, and received steroid packages from Zahor Ian. It's a major pet peeve when wrestlers claim they never knew about the side effects when they used steroids, because the side effects were well known in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Every bodybuilder I knew in the late 70s knew about the potential side effects. That we didn't know they were dangerous when we used them stuff is crap. Everyone knew. The guys in the 60s that used all knew about the bodybuilders and powerlifters with kidney and liver problems and bad steroid reactions. They just didn't choose to accept them or listen because the results were so addictive. And now we've got an even more ridiculous extreme by saying if you use them they'll kill you.
Donahue was almost as bad, saying that he doesn't blame anyone for using steroids before we knew the horrible things they did.
We knew 95% of the side effects from steroids that we know now 20 years ago, and while they can be horrible with either bad luck or major abuse, as a general rule, horrible isn't the applicable word, and saying they'll kill you is even less responsible than saying we didn't know.
Pipers claim that the wrestlers are tested for steroids twice every 8 or 9 days, and he'd been tested twice in the previous 9 days was also false. According to Dr. Anthony Daly, who heads the WWF steroid testing program, there have been 5 WWF steroid tests since the first one on November 13, 1991. They are spread 4 to 6 weeks apart. He said the most recent test he has results from was in late February, and in that test, 20 of the group's 50-plus wrestlers were tested.
According to Graham, he was never a leg breaker for the mob.
Haynes, who wasn't even on the show, did spend time in jail, although it was about 15 years ago. So did Orton, which is no secret, so those statements were true. When Hodgson was reached on Monday shortly after filming the Geraldo Rivera talk show that airs this coming Thursday, he appeared shocked at the statement he was gay. He said he almost wished he was, just to throw McMahon's cries of homophobia back in his face.
Even if it were true, it has no relevance, nor does it put anything in any kind of a different light.
In addition, it was McMahon, not Pritchard, who auditioned him, and also negotiated with him and signed him to a 2-year deal. He was hired and worked for the company, using the television name Mark Jennings, well, after Pritchard was fired. Oh yeah, and in Roddy's previous 7 house show matches, not one of the arenas was sold out.
Graham's lawsuit against the WWF, Titan Sports, Dr. George Zahor EN and 7 drug companies that manufactured anabolic steroids was filed nearly 2 weeks ago in Philadelphia.
All parties have 20 days to respond in writing. I expect Titan to take an aggressive stance in this case. Graham returned home from the hospital on Monday after some pretty serious complications ensued following an operation to replace his first replacement hip 2 weeks ago.
Graham suffered a minor collapsed lung and major blood loss in the surgery's aftermath.
The worst came Wednesday when the new artificial hip became detached, which it was first feared would require yet another operation, which, luckily, the doctors were able to get the artificial hip back into position without surgery. New York Post columnist Phil Mushnick, who has broken many of the stories relating to this scandal and wrote a Go for the Jugular editorial on McMahon a few weeks back, was blasted in the Charleston Post-Courier by WWF spokesperson Steve Planamenta in typical Titan tradition of trying to deflect damaging issues and turn them into personality conflicts to be able to claim personal vendetta. Planamenta claimed that Tom Cole was manipulated and coerced and used by media members for their own purposes. He also said in regard to the blistering Mushnick column, the article was bad to the point of being good. I think people have finally come to realize what Phil Mushnick's agenda is
a personal attack against Vince McMahon.
He's made no bones about the fact that he hates Vince McMahon for no particular reason. He's never had the guts to meet with Vince McMahon. John Filippelli, who's one of our executive television producers, has known Phil for years.
John was a producer at NBC, and Mushnick had told John long before he had written anything about us that Vince was an evil person and should burn in hell.
I think he just doesn't like what we do, maybe resents Vince's success and resents that no matter what he writes about us, nobody seems to give a crap. Mushnick responded to the comments in a follow-up story in the same newspaper saying, John Filippelli is an old friend, and clearly this has done more than strain our relationship. It's virtually destroyed it. This story has grown far beyond my relationship with John Filippelli. John called me shortly after I started writing about the steroid trial about how the media had abandoned such a big story. John said, just between us, Vince is a good guy, lay off of him. I told him that anyone who says that trial had nothing to do with the WWF should go straight to hell. And he basically agreed with me. He said that I didn't even know the half of it. But at that point I was just starting to. I didn't hear another word about it until Vince McMahon got on the Larry King show and said, Phil Mushnick despises me so much that he told John Filippelli I should go to hell. He made it sound as if that was on the sex charges.
That was clearly long before the sex charges.
Why would John Filippelli call me to explain Vince McMahon to me before I ever wrote anything? And if I hadn't met him personally, why would I have a personal vendetta against him? I've spoken with him. I wouldn't give him 2 minutes of my time now. There's nothing he says that I believe. The same story quotes an insider close to the story as saying, Tom Cole called Phil Mushnick last July.
He called him every day for months. Phil Mushnick didn't find him. He called Phil last July after Phil did a steroid story and he thought there might be a guy willing to go head-to-head with the WWF. He called him almost every day for months and wanted Phil to write that story. It wasn't until they got 2 other kids to come forward that Phil agreed. Phil wanted an exclusive, but he was still beaten for the story.
Whatever Tom Cole said about being manipulated by the media, my feeling is that if Tom Cole wanted his job back, he manipulated the media. If you're not looking for media attention, you don't call a reporter almost every day for 8 months and you don't go to the New York Post. This is going to get a lot uglier before it gets better. I don't think any story can or will be more brutal than the Now piece, although a similar story on a more respected news program or major publication revealing the same information would be far more damaging. Those who think this story will now fade to black as it has run its course are being premature, although I certainly wish it would. Besides, at this point the media is the least serious concern of the WWF now. What will be the end result of all this? Only a fool would make a prediction at this point. As for WCW, the big news is the change in hierarchy as reported last week. According to Executive Vice President Kip Fry, the change should mean almost nothing in terms of company structure. Fry is still the man in charge of day-to-day operations. Jack Petrick's role with the company is basically gone, and in his place will be Bill Shaw as the department head and Bob Dway as the man Fry reports to. Titan introduced its bodybuilding television show WBF Body Stars this past Saturday on the USA Network, while WCW introduced its new format for World Championship Wrestling later that same day. The WBF show, a half-hour show which airs at 11 a.m., is a vehicle to get the bodybuilders over as celebrities and good guys. The show emanates from the gym on the second floor at Titan Towers, hosted by Vince McMahon and a female bodybuilder who I believe is the younger sister of Corey Everson, and if she isn't, could easily pass for it. In the background there are dozens of others pumping away, and the hosts introduce segments that range from training and nutritional advice to babyface personal appearance work of the WBF stars, usually with a WWF wrestler since the bodybuilders themselves aren't celebrities yet on their own outside of the muscle gym, with bumper clips to propagate what a fitness lifestyle brings, showing the guys jet skiing and the like to give you the impression they are living out a fantasy lifestyle. The first show spent several minutes talking about the WBF drug testing program and how it's better than the Olympics because the second word in the general public's mind, when they think of competitive bodybuilders, is steroids. The first word generally is gross. Overall, the show was very impressive. As expected, graphics and production are first-rate and the show is quick enough paced that it doesn't get old. The weaknesses are there is still too much posing, because after 90 seconds, all the flexing looks the same to an unaided eye. In addition, none of the bodybuilders project much in the way of personality on television. An interview by Tom Platz, the bodybuilding legend who pretty much occupies the role corporately, this isn't meant as a joke here, Pat Patterson used to with the wrestlers with Gary Stridham, was particularly flat. Based on the first episode, this show will turn out to be a tremendous personal vehicle for McMahon, whose facial expressions and loud grunting when he's doing his pumping steel most scenes, and Lex Luger, whose heel persona amidst 13 bland babyfaces will get over tremendously. The show certainly comes across a lot better than those Joe Weider commercials that coincidentally started the same weekend all over the WCW broadcasts. The new WCW format, which has been compared to a takeoff on the WWF's primetime wrestling show, was also a pleasant surprise given the reaction by those who saw the first taping live. Jim Ross hosts the show with a different guest host each week. The next 3 weeks will have Kip Fry, Dusty Rhodes and Bill Fralick of the Atlanta Falcons, many of whom will be non-wrestling personalities. It was good to start with Jesse Ventura because he was a key in the first show coming off so well. It'll be interesting how the show comes across when more of the bugs are worked out, but also when Ross has to work off of weaker television personalities. The show opened with a 3 3/4 stars match between a very much injured Brian Pillman and Brad Armstrong. They did a lengthy segment with Ron Simmons, with a package of both football and personality clips that was extremely effective. Simmons came out in a suit and tie, and clearly this shows a total directional difference by WCW as compared with WWF, as it, at least in this case, tried to portray the wrestler as a serious athlete as opposed to a cartoon character. Simmons stressed kids staying in school and staying off drugs. I still cringe when most wrestlers talk about drugs, and his interview couldn't even be categorized as a promo. The rest of the show consisted of matches, including a 2 of 3 fall main event between mid-card guys, which is an attempt to get 20-minute matches on television with natural commercial breaks. My personal feeling on this is with the right talent, long being 20 minutes for television, 30 minutes plus on pay-per-view, can be an excellent change of pace and will be etched in one's memory much better than the average quickie match. But they really work better as a change of pace as opposed to a weekly thing. Long matches with mid-card wrestlers of average or less than average ability, like the Freebirds on next week's show, for instance, have the potential to be death. This is the first issue of the current 4-issue set. If you've got A1 on your address label, it means that your Observer subscription will expire in 3 more weeks. Renewal rates remain $6 for 4 issues, $12 for 8, $24 for 16, $36 for 24, $48 for 32 up through $60 for 40 issues within the United States, Canada, and Mexico. Rates for the rest of the world are $9 for each set of 4 issues up through $90 for 40 issues.
All subscription renewals, letters to the editor, reports of arena shows, news items and any other correspondence pertaining to this newsletter should be sent to the Wrestling Observer Newsletter, P.O. Box 1228, Campbell, California 950091228.
Fax messages can be sent to the Observer afternoon Eastern Time, 9 a.m. Pacific, on a daily basis at 408-378-6562. EMLL. March 27th at Arena Mexico in Mexico City saw Black Magic, Norman Smiley and Blue Demon Jr. and Leo del Solitario win 2 out of 3 falls from Ponzonia, and El Espectro Jr. and Universo 2000 when Solitario pinned Universo 1 3/4 star. Solomon Grundy and Ultimate Dragon, Yoshihiro Asai and Dandy beat Los Brazos in 15:35 in a match where Dragon and Brazo de Plata looked great 2.5 stars. El Satanico and Bestia Salvaje and Blue Panther beat Octagon and Love Machine, Art Juicer Bar, and Atlantis in 2 straight falls when Salvaje pinned Atlantis in 2 straight with a lariat off the top rope in the first fall and a power bomb in the second fall. This match was to set up Atlantis defending the NWA World Middleweight title against Salvaje, but Salvaje was injured 4 days later in Mexico City, blowing out his ankle, so that potential 4-star match had to be changed. 3.25 stars main event saw Sangre Chicana and La Fiera and Cien Cars beat Conan and Canadian Vampire Casanova and Perro Aguayo. The Faces lost the first fall, and actually pinned Chicana to win the second, but heel ref El Gato Montini disqualified the Face team for not stopping beating on Chicana after the pinfall. 2.75 stars. After the match, Vampire threw Montini over the top rope, which I believe will be the excuse to suspend Vampire since he's going back home for a few months. Octagon beat Bestia Salvaje on March 26 in Cuernavaca to keep the Mexican middleweight title.
This Sunday's television show, taped April 3 in Mexico City, has a mask versus mask match with Blue Panther vs. Love Machine and the NWA World Middleweight title match with Atlantis vs. La Fiera.
This will be the final television taping until the May 24 taping at Arena Mexico as they move back to the 5,500-seat Arena Coliseo the following week, which means weaker shows generally.
Also on the card, Cien Cars and Mascara Año 2000 and Universo 2000 vs. Aguayo and Conan and Rayo de Jalisco Jr. in what is being billed as Conan's retirement match, The Untouchables, Pierre Roth Jr. and Massacre and Jacquemate, the CMLL Trios champions, in a non-title match against Octagon and Mascara Sagrada and Apollo Dante.
Satanico regained the NWA Light Heavyweight title from Liz Mark on April 5 at Arena Mexico in Mexico City. This adds to Satanico's record of holding the most different individual singles championships in the history of Lucha Libre. This result was a shocker since Liz Mark was seemingly a sure bet to drop the strap to Ultimate Dragon on April 18 in Tokyo. In the main event on the same card, Apollo Dantes won a hair versus hair match from Javier Cruz. Blue Panther kept the CMLL middleweight title beating El Filoso last week in Mexico City, and Ciclone Ramirez won a mask versus mask match from Delia Negra, who turned out to be Emiliano Quiroga, formerly known as El Soriano. UWA. Andre the Giant makes his first trip to Mexico in many years on April 18 and April 19.
Bam Bam Bigelow also returns on April 12. April 5 at El Torreo in Naucalpan was headlined by El Hijo del Sano retaining his UWA welterweight title beating Sombra Negra, Juan Salazar. Apparently this was a weak main event on a weak card. Also Fishman and the Headhunters from Puerto Rico beat Pegasus Kid, Chris Benoit in his first week as a babyface here, and Gran Hamada and Villano Trace when Fishman pinned Kid to set up either a hair versus mask match or a WWF light heavyweight title match between the two of them.
The other top match on the card saw UWA Trios champions the Death Missionaries, Negro Navarro and El Signo and Black Power 2, lose a non-title match to Silver King and El Texano and Villano 4.
Pegasus Kid retained the WWF light heavyweight title on April 3 in Netzahualcoyot against Villano 4.
Pegasus Kid still worked as a heel Saturday night in Cuernavaca teaming with Headhunters against Silver King and Villano Trace and Hamada.
All Japan. No major news, although the Champion Carnival Tour continues to pack the houses.
Last Sunday's television show headlined by the Jumbo Tsuruta vs. Terry Gordy match drew a disappointing
3.9 rating, 3 previous weeks drew 5.7 6/3.5 and
5.4 ratings.
Top matches at the March 27 taping in Wakayama saw Tsuruta and Gordy battle to a 30-minute draw, Stan Hansen pinned Kenta Kobashi with a lariat, Danny Spivey pinned Akira Tao with the DDT, and Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura and Mitsuharu Misawa beat the Wild Bun, Masafuchi and Motoshi Okuma and Haruka Eigen. April 1st in Sanyo drew a sellout 3,250 as Tsuruta and Tao and Fuchi beat Misawa and Kawada and Kikuchi when Tao pinned Kikuchi with the arm bomber in 22:31. Hansen and Johnny Ace beat Abdullah the Butcher and Kimala 2. Gordy pinned Doug Furna. Steve Williams pinned Yoshinari Ogawa, Spivey pinned Master Blaster, Al Green, Kobashi pinned David Isley, Dan Crawford pinned Mighty Inoue and Baba, and Kimura beat Okuma and Eigen.
Joel Deaton returned home to the United States because of his injury this tour.
Major show on April 2nd at the Yokohama Bunka Gym before a sellout 4,900 fans. This airs this coming Sunday on television. Saw Tsuruta go to a 30-minute draw with Misawa. Hansen pinned Spivey, Kawada pinned Crawford, Gordy pinned Fuchi, Williams pinned Tao, Abdullah and Kimala 2 beat Kobashi and Kikuchi. Ace and Blaster beat Furnace and Isley, and Baba and Kimura beat Okuma and Eigen.
March 30th in Nagaoka drew a sellout 3,800 as Misawa and Kawada and Kobashi beat Tsuruta and Tao and Ogawa when Kawada beat Ogawa with the Dragon Sleeper in 23:20. Hansen and Spivey beat Crawford and Furnace. Gordy pinned Kikuchi, Williams pinned Isley. Fuchi beat Kimala 2, Ace pinned Blaster, Abdullah beat Mighty Inoue and Baba, and Kimura beat Eigen and Okuma. April 3rd in Choshi drew a poor crowd of 1,800 as Misawa and Kawada beat Tsuruta and Fuchi in 14:36 with a facelock by Misawa on Fuchi. Williams and Gordy beat Hansen and Blaster, Abdullah pinned Tao, Kobashi pinned Ogawa, Ace beat Kimala 2, Spivey pinned Isley in 1:20. Furnace and Crawford beat Kikuchi and Mitsuo Momota, and Baba and Kimura beat Okuma and Eigen. April 4th in Fuji drew 3,900 as Williams and Gordy and Blaster beat Misawa and Kawada and Kikuchi when Gordy pinned Kikuchi with a powerbomb in 17:21. Tsuruta beat Kimala 2, Hansen pinned Tao, Kobashi pinned Isley, Abdullah pinned Ogawa, Ace and Spivey beat Crawford and Furna. Baba and Kimura and Momota beat Okuma and Eigen and Fuchi in 25:10 of a comedy match. March 31st in Toyama drew a sellout 4,300 for a television taping, which aired this past Sunday night, as Hansen and Spivey beat Abdullah and Kimala 2, Tao pinned Kawada in an upset in 17:03 with the Golden Arm Bomber, Misawa pinned Kikuchi with a Tiger Drive. Tsuruta beat Blaster with the Sleeper, Gordy pinned Ace with the Power Bomb, Williams pinned Crawford with the Oklahoma Stampede, Furnace and Isley beat Ogawa and Mighty Inoue and Baba and Kimura, and Kikuchi beat Eigen and Okuma and Fuchi. Other Japan notes. In New Japan, the Blonde Outlaws group, Super Strong Machine and Norio Onaga and Hiro Saito and Tatsutoshi Goto, have changed their name to the Raging Staff. Complete PWF show for April 19th at the Tokyo Coliseum has Masakatsu Funaki vs. boxing legend Roberto Duran, Minoru Suzuki vs. Wayne Shamrock, Yoshiaki Fujiwara vs. Jerry Flynn, Bart Vale vs. Kilauea, and prelims. Akira Maeda is headed to Bulgaria to bring in new athlete from that country to compete in rings. SWS cards upcoming are April 16th in Minami Ishiguro, headlined by the Natural Powers, King Haku and Yoshiaki Yatsu, defending their SWS tag team titles against George and Shunji Takano. April 17th in Yokohama has the Natural Powers defending the belts against the Natural Disasters, Earthquake and Typhoon. Naoki Sano vs. Chavo Guerrero for the SWS Junior Heavyweight title, and Ric Flair vs. Genichiro Tenryu in what is being billed as the Battle of King. April 18th at the Tokyo Coliseum has an SWS Tag Team title match with a match to be announced depending upon the results of the two previous nights, Ultimate Dragon vs. Lizmark in what was being billed as an NWA Light Heavyweight title match, but obviously that won't be the case since Lizmark lost the title Sunday, in Mexico City. Sano vs. Guerrero for the SWS Junior title, and Flair vs. Tenryu in Battle of Kings 2. The Japanese were pretty much tipped off about a week ago since the Flair-Tenryu match, which was being billed as a WWF title match, was announced as a non-title match instead 1 week ago. UWFI is close to getting a television contract with a Tokyo station. Their May 8th card at the Hamamatsu Arena was announced as Nobuhiko Takada vs. Gary Albright to determine the first UWFI World Martial Arts Champion. The semi-main event has Kiyoshi Tamura vs. boxer Matthew Saad Muhammad from Philadelphia. Saad Muhammad, 37, who is many years past his prime, is still active as a pro wrestler after debuting professionally back in 1974 and has a 39-16-3 record for 29 knockouts. During his prime he was considered one of the most exciting boxers of all time and held the WBC World Light Heavyweight Championship from April 22, 1979 when he beat Marvin Johnson until August 7, 1982 when he lost to Dwight Braxton. Koji Kiao debuts in this style versus Kazuo Yamazaki, and in an exhibition match, Billy Robinson vs. Nick Bockwinkel with Lou Thez as referee. Universal Promotions has its next show on April 19 at Tokyo's Korakuen Hall, headlined by UWA Intercontinental Tag Team title match with Punish and Crush, Akiyoshi and Takayama in Mexico, defending against Gran Hamada and Transformer, better known in Japan as Kendo.
Robin Hood and Oro vs Canelo Casas and Shuel Guerrero, Masamichinoku and Sakigaki Gantetsu vs Lightning Kid and Dynamic Lin, Jerry Lin, and an All-Japan women's match.
FMW Next Tour begins May 2 with a no-rope barbed wire death match in Hiroshima with Atsushi Onita vs The Sheik. May 3 is an outdoor show in Osaka with a no-rope street fight barbed wire match with Onita and Tarzan Goto vs Sheik and Sabu, and May 7 in Toyota has a match for the FMW World Martial Arts Tag Team title with Onita and Goto vs Big Titan and Centurion, who I believe is Tim Patterson from California. Rings drew a sellout 5,480 in Hiroshima on April 3 with the major upset main event as Folk Han made Akira Maeda submit with the knee lock in 1728, so Maeda felt it was time to create a new star. The other top matches saw Masaki Sadik knock out Herman Renting and Willie Williams knock out Mitsuya Nagai.
The new JWP Promotions had its inaugural show on April 3 at Tokyo's Korakuen Hall before a sellout 2010 fans with Mayumi Ozaki and Kyuri Suzuki beating Dynamite Kansai and Hikari Fukuoka in the main event and Devil Masami pinning Harley Saito in the semifinal.
All Japan Women on April 5 in Yakio drew 1,850 as Bull Nakano pinned Mariko Yoshida, and Asia Kong and Bison Kimura beat Toshio Yamada and Minami Toyota in a non-title match.
April 3 in Yaita drew 1,100 as Suzuka Minami pinned Kyoko Inoue and Yamada and Toyota beat Nakano and Bat Yoshinaga. USWA.
March 30 in Memphis saw Don Bass draw with Kat Garrett, Big Black Dog pinned Ricky Hayes, Tom Pritchard beat Tony Falk, Eric Embry beat Tony Anthony in an Anything Goes match, Brian Christopher beat Jimmy Valiant to keep the Southern title, Kimala beat Coco Were via DQ to keep the USWA title in Moondog Spot, and Big Black Dog and Richard Lee beat Jerry Lawler and Jeff Jarrett and Leatherface in the main event. March 31 in Louisville saw Falk beat Hayes, Pritchard beat Carolina Crusher, Christopher beat Garrett, Embry DDQ Anthony, and Lawler and Jarrett DDQ Spot and Black Dog.
April 4 in Nashville saw Star Riders beat Garrett and Hayes, Pritchard beat Falk, Embry beat Anthony, Christopher beat Garrett, Lawler and Jarrett beat Moondog Spot and Big Black Dog, and Lawler and Jarrett won a Redmond Rumble Tag Team Battle Royal under Royal Rumble rules. Moondog Spike, Bill Smithson, quit the promotion last week and a new Moondog debuted on television Saturday. I'm not sure who the new Moondog is other than readers have speculated the names of Gene Lewis or J.R. Hogg. Eric Embry is no longer booking, with host chores being handled mainly by Jerry Jarrett with help from Lawler and Jeff Jarrett. New to the promotion are the Birds, Action Jackson and King Parsons, who celebrated their first night in by missing the shot in Nashville, and the Star Riders, a heel tag team from Florida, one member of whom is Rick Ryder. The Star Riders looked really bad in their television debut as each man stumbled and fell off the top rope trying to do finishing moves. Lawler threw fire at Richard Lee again Monday night in Memphis. Lee claimed Spike was gone because his brain was swollen from all the blows to the head by Lawler and Jarrett, and he's in the hospital, and Lawler said it's a lie because Spike doesn't have a brain. Lawler and Jarrett then got Lee in the ring and tore off his clothes until Spot and the new Moondog ran in with boards and garbage cans and took care of them until Eddie Marlin threatened to fire them. New manager Lauren Davenport screamed at Tony Falk during his interview saying he was terrible, and he's letting her down because he's losing all of his matches. She told Falk, who she continually slaps around, that if he doesn't get better, he's gone. April 6 in Memphis was headlined by a Redmond Rumble, which was a tag team battle royal under Royal Rumble rules, and if one member of the team is eliminated, the other is also eliminated. Teams announced for the show were Lawler and Jarrett, Moondogs, Star Riders, Embry and Falk, Pritchard and Hayes, Garrett and Anthony, Birds, Brian Christopher and Dr. Death, who is back after a 1-week absence. Also Pritchard vs. Death Mississippi Texas and Dirty White Girl vs. Nurse Cratchit and Lauren Davenport, Star Riders vs. Garrett and Hayes, Birds vs. Embry and Falk, Christopher vs. Anthony for the Southern title, and Moondogs vs. Lawler and Jarrett for the USWA Tag Team title. Kimala is gone for a few weeks for a tour of Japan. Moondogs also dominated the television show. During a Christopher vs. Pritchard match for the Southern title on TV, Moondogs jumped in and beat up Pritchard with Christopher jumping out of the ring to avoid the attack. Next TV match was Embry vs. Anthony, and Moondogs beat up Anthony with Embry in the ring laughing about it, and then the Moondogs beat up Embry as well. Lawler and Jarrett made the save with boards and a broom. It appears to be the beginning of an Embry turn. Global. April 3rd at the Dallas Sportatorium drew 500 fans. As for a April 21st ESPN air date, Terry Sims and Gary Young and Scott Putski beat John Tatum and Rod Price and Stephen Dane when Putski pinned Tatum. After the match, Bonnie Blackstone interviewed Sims and Putski, with Young standing there and complaining that since he was injured and replaced in the tag team match where Sims and Putski won the GWF tag team titles last week, that Sims, the replacement, they should give him his belt. This led to Young grabbing Putski's belt and throwing it on the floor and running away with it, turning heel. Then Bruce Force beat Sam Houston and Chaz by DQ. Danny Davis pinned Barry Horowitz to win the GWF light heavyweight title. Eddie Gilbert pinned Dark Patriot in a North American title versus mask match when Gilbert ducked when Bruce Pritchard went to hit him with his belt and hit DP instead, and he was pinned. Pritchard took the mask off DP and revealed another mask, and they got out of the ring before revealing him as Doug Gilbert. Then in a 15-man battle royal for syndication that won't appear on ESPN to determine the GWF television title that was stripped from Eddie Gilbert a few weeks back, Houston pinned Sims as the final two men, and it was the best match on the show. Also for syndication, Danny Davis pinned the Viper, Mike Davis, Sims and Putski beat Brute Force, James Beard knocked out Pritchard in the second round of a boxing match. Horowitz then attacked Beard. Gilbert tried to make the save but was attacked by Dark Patriot until a large man in street clothes with a mask made the save. Gilbert pulled the mask off the guy to reveal Dave Sheldon, formerly Angel of Death, who is back after another major knee operation. Final match on the card saw Bill Irwin beat Big Bad John, subbing for Black Bart, in a double pole match. Horowitz climbed the pole and got a horseshoe and threw it to John, however Irwin ducked the blow and schoolboyed him for the win. Bart moved to Florida because he got a new regular job but had said he's appeared to put Irwin over for the final night but no showed. Tatum and Price turned babyface when Skander Akbar went to sell their contracts to Pritchard. When Tatum and Price acted like they wanted to part of Pritchard, Dark Patriot and Dane attacked them and left them laying in a pool of blood. Several other heels joined in on the attack, so the fans knew Tatum and Price had made the turn. April 10th has Dane vs. Todd Overbo, Young vs. Putski, Irwin vs. Bull Payne for the Brass Knucks title, Dark Patriot and Big Bad John vs. Gilbert, and Angel of Death, Sims vs. Viper, Beard vs. Pritchard, with Irwin as ref, with the loser being the first man stripped of his clothes. This card won't be taped for television. Here and there. Dennis Coraluzzo and Larry Sharp ran a show March 27th in Pikesville, Maryland before 300 fans, with Lords of Darkness beating Cream Team, Spider over Chris Candido managed by Jim Cornette via DQ, Joe Daniels beat AC Golden, formerly Golden Phoenix, Nikolai Volkov beat Kimala via DQ, and Roadblock beat Thaw. March 28th in Clementon, New Jersey drew 700 as Golden drew Victor Rivera Jr., Candido managed by Cornette, beat Chris Evans managed by Dr. Mark Curtis, in what was said to have been a great match. Volkov beat Mike Sharp via DQ, Kimala pinned Roadblock, and main event Spider and promoter Coraluzzo go to a no decision with female manager Amy Lee and Daniels, when Spider getting knocked out and Coraluzzo taking a pounding from the heels until Jim Cornette made the say. A benefit show at Duluth High School in Duluth, Georgia drew 300 on April 1st, headlined by Bambi. It was her high school, beating Judy Martin, plus Ron Garvin beat Al Navarro, an early 1970s wrestler for Ann Gunkel, the Patriot Del Wilkes, Pez Watley and Ken Timms also appear. Carlitos Colon beat Ron Garvin on April 4th in Cogwas to win the Universal title. Steve Dahl and Grappler beat John Rambo and Colonel De Beers in a cage match on April 4th in Portland to win the Northwest Tag Team titles. Other results saw Mike Miller beat Jesse Barr, Don Harris beat C.W. Bergstrom, Mike Winter beat Northwest champ Ron Harris in a non-title match, Sandy Barr beat Al Madrill, and Bart Sawyer beat Buddy Rose in a match where Sawyer lost. He had to eat a Butterfinger candy bar, and if Rose lost, he had to eat spinach, the single food he hated the most. Rose ate the spinach and then threw up in the ring. Watching Buddy Rose throw up sounds like tremendous entertainment to me, too. Ron Harris won the Northwest title from Dahl on March 24th in Vancouver, Washington. A group called Mawa is promoting weekly in Mesquite, Texas, and on April 1st they drew 340 fans to see Rod Price and Awesome Kong managed by Armand Hussein beat the Stomper and Action Jackson via DQ. Gary Sturdivant's Big D Pro Wrestling, booked by Chris Love, runs every Sunday night at a converted roller rink in Dallas, and on April 5th, main event saw Eric Fontaine and Jimmy James and Miss Judy, promoter's wife, beat Awesome Kong and Ray Evans and CJ, not the one from Memphis. April 12th has Chaz vs. Sean Stevens, formerly Kenny the Stinger, Bull Payne vs. Tug Taylor, the Blackbirds, King Parsons and Action Jackson vs. the Fat Boys, who spent something like a week in Memphis, Dane vs. Terry Daniels, and Fontaine and James vs. Kong and Evans. Sam Houston and Baby Doll are booked for the April 18th show in Kaufman, Texas, but don't take that to mean a reconciliation. North Georgia Wrestling run by Sam Kent, Steve Lawler and Danny Dees had a TV taping before a turnaway crowd of 100 in Alpharetta, Georgia on April 11.
Mike Kurovich is the Georgia champion and Festus is TV champion. Lawler turned babyface when manager Diana Helmsley turned on him, sending the convicts into the cage to beat up on Festus and Lawler, who had a cage match.
This will air on CH
69's wrestling block as part of Pro Wrestling This Week with Scott Hudson and Stephen DeTruth as announcers. ACW is running 3 shows over the next week on April 10th in Moulton, Alabama, April 11th in Oneonta, Alabama, and April 16th in Priceville, Alabama, with Bob Armstrong, Wendell Cooley and Robert Gibson as the biggest names. Sadistic Steve Strong, Steve DeSalvo, TNT, Hurricane Castillo Jr., Hercules Ayala, Invader No. 4, Misty Blue, Monster Ripper, Sunny Beach, Jeff Tiger Shack, Jeff Gaylord, Manny Fernandez, Chicky Star, Ray Gonzalez, Tom Brandy, Super Medico No. 4, Galan Mendoza and Jose Luis Rivera are working for the AWF in Puerto Rico. Steve Gatorwolf's AWF had 2 title changes, with Gatorwolf losing his AWF title to Starman, Billy Anderson, on April 5th in Tuba City, Arizona, and regaining it April 7th in Kanab, Utah.
El Hijo del Santo and El Hijo del Solitario beat Mondo Guerrero and El Espanto Jr. in the main event on March 20th in Tijuana before 1,500 fans.
Also, Super Muñeco and Rey Mysterio and American Eagle, Danny Davis, beat the Mercenaries, Billy Anderson and Tim Patterson and Louis Piccoli, via DQ. May 17th in Barrie, Vermont for promoter Cliff Bartz has Barbarian vs. Demolition Axe, Bill Eadie, Hercules vs. Marty Jannetty plus Dino Bravo.
Atlantic Coast Wrestling drew 60 on March 14th in Lincolnton, North Carolina, with Jeff Rudd winning Atlantic Coast title, beating Foster Hughes and Mike Maverick, and Bart Cranford winning IWF Tag Team titles from the Beck brothers.
March 21st in Newton, North Carolina before 130 saw Rudd beat Hughes and Maverick, and Cranford beat Bobby Bolt and Flash.
Larry Sharp's court fight for breach of contract with Soul Talker, now Papa Shango, was thrown out of court this past week, which makes him 0 for 2 in the legal department. April 24th in Newington, Connecticut has Coco Ware vs. Mike Sharp plus DC Drake, and Larry Winters vs. Jules Strongbow and Cousin Luke. April 10th in Plainfield, Connecticut has Hercules vs. Ken Patera, Bam Bam Bigelow vs. Samu the Samoan plus for the Samoan works, and Ox Baker will manage. Congrats to Observer reader Brian Smith of New London, Connecticut on his proposed marriage next week to Joyce Andy. Add Manny Fernandez, Chris Adams and Brian Blair to the list of those now working for Buck Robley in Louisiana, which include Greg Valentine, between WCW dates, Tim Horner, Bob Orton, on Primetime Powers, Paul Orndorff, Eli the Eliminator, Robert Gibson and Bob Holly, as the Rock and Roll Express, Buddy Landell and Ken Massey. WWF. Randy Savage appeared with Regis and Kathy Lee on the Wednesday before WrestleMania. Hulk Hogan bought a new $2.3 million home in Tampa over the past 2 weeks to end the rumor of him leaving for Hawaii, which also makes the Japan gig less likely and staying with the WWF pretty darn likely, particularly with that finish.
The USA Network special with the tribute to Hogan did a 3.6 rating on Sunday night and a 3.3 for the replay on Monday night, which I'd have to tab, at least for Sunday. It's disappointing since they aired the Hogan Warrior match for the first time on television and hyped the Hogan retirement and Liz interview Soma. All-American the Sunday prior to Mania did a 2.8, which is much better than it had been doing. The movie Rough Stuff, which Hogan stars in, is scheduled for a January release. March 26th in Salt Lake City drew 2,000 as Chris Walker pinned Kato 1/2 star, Crush pinned Berserker 1/2 star, Natural Disasters beat Jim Duggan and Sergeant Slaughter via DQ 2.5 stars, Repo Man pinned Jim Powers Dud, British Bulldog pinned Ted DiBiase, negative many stars, Owen Hart and Coco Ware beat Beverly Brothers 1 star and Roddy Piper beat Ric Flair in a cage match 2 stars. For those who keep track of real names, Chris Walker's real name is Glenn Kuhn.
WCW. Tentative for the June pay-per-view show from Mobile, Alabama will include a bikini contest with Medusa vs. Missy, and not making this up, Sting vs. Cactus Jack with falls counting anywhere on the Gulf Coast, Ricky Steamboat vs. Rick Rude in some kind of a stipulation match, and Rick and Scott Steiner vs. Steve Williams and Terry Gord.
The NWA World Tag Team Title Tournament will start on the June Clash in Charleston, South Carolina with 8 first-round matches and 16 teams. There will be about a half dozen non-WCW teams entered.
The final 8 teams will go to the Bash on July 12th in Baltimore, with the quarterfinals, semifinals and finals taking place that night.
An educated guess says that a climactic Sting vs. Big Van Vader match will headline that pay-per-view show, and Brian Pillman vs. Scotty Flamingo will be on the card as well. Pillman's back injury appears to be worse than originally thought, and he's still not back in action, although Dustin Rhodes returned over the weekend. Only 2 matches were taped April 1st in Center Stage, both 2 out of 3 fall matches for airing the next 2 weeks on WCW, with Freebirds beat Terrence Taylor and Greg Valentine in a non-title match in a sleeper of a match, as in Which Fall Will You Fall Asleep During, and Nikita Koloff over Larry Zbyszko in 2 straight falls of a match said to be a lot better than it sounds on tape. March 31st at the Meadowlands from all accounts was an excellent house show, drawing 4,500 paid as Richard Morton pinned Mike Graham 2.5 stars. Terrence Taylor pinned Diamond Dallas Page 2 stars, Ron Simmons and Big Josh beat Vinny Vegas and Mr. Hughes 2.5 stars, Cactus Jack beat Johnny B. Bad via countout 2 stars. Barry Windham and JYD beat Larry Zbyszko and Steve Austin in a superb bunkhouse tag team match 4 stars, Big Van Vader pinned Marcus Bagwell 1/2 star. Steiners beat Arnold Anderson and Bobby Eaton via DQ 3 stars, and Sting pinned Rick Rude to keep the WCW title in 19 minutes 4 stars.
Kip Frey is negotiating with MTV for a tie-in similar to the 1984-85 MTV/WWF tie-in.
That K. Allen Fry vs. Dallas Page angle has got to go.
April 5th in Jacksonville drew 4,100, 3,300 paid, as Valentine and Taylor beat Bagwell and Zenk 2 stars, Bad pinned Tracy Smothers 1 star, Cactus Jack pinned JYD 1/2 star.
Nikita Koloff pinned Page Dud, Rhodes and Windham beat Zbyszko and Austin 2.5 stars. Rude beat Steamboat via DQ when the Dangerous Alliance ran in 3 stars.
Anderson and Eaton double countout with Steiners 3.25 stars, and Sting pinned Vader in a match which surprised everyone as to how good it was, 3.5 stars. April 3rd in Washington, D.C. saw Bad pin Smothers, Valentine and Taylor beat Zenk and Bagwell, Koloff pinned Page, JYD beat Cactus, Windham and Rhodes beat Austin and Zbyszko, Steiners beat Anderson and Eaton via DQ when Austin interfered, Rude beat Steamboat via DQ and Sting pinned Vade.
March 26th in Terre Haute, in Saw Morton beat Graham, Vader pinned Bagwell, Simmons and Josh beat Vader and Hughes, Windham and JYD beat Austin and Zbyszko, Taylor pinned Page, Bad beat Cactus Jack via countout, Steiners beat Anderson and Eaton via DQ when Medusa interfered and Sting pinned Drew. WCW main event on March 29th drew a 2.9 rating, WCW on March 28th did a 2.5 and Power Hour that morning did a 1.9.
April 2nd in Norfolk drew 2,800 as Bad pinned Smothers, JYD beat Cactus, Valentine and Taylor beat Zenk and Bagwell, Koloff pinned Page, Steiners beat Anderson and Eaton via DQ, Windham and Rhodes beat Austin and Zbyszko, Rude beat Steamboat via DQ and Sting pinned Vade.
WCW has 6 B shows booked in small Georgia and Alabama towns in the month of May to give the younger wrestlers more ring time. Steve Armstrong is apparently history over a contract dispute. No word on El Gigante, but nobody mentions his name anymore. In fact, I'm not even sure anyone remembers his name.
April 6th in Macon, Georgia for TV taping drew 3,000, 2,000 paid.
Apparently they did an angle already where Ricky Steamboat kissed Medusa because they did interviews referring to the incident.
Rhodes beat Eaton via DQ in a 2.5 stars match when Austin did a run-in and Windham made the save.
Hold that thought and you can book 4 hours of television. Taylor and Valentine beat PN News and Johnny Rich. Bagwell beat JT Southern via DQ for an over-the-top rope, and then Scotty Flamingo ran in and Tom Zenk made the save. Rhodes and Windham beat Austin and Eaton when Rhodes pinned Eaton with the Bulldog 2.75 stars. In a dark match, Steiners beat Anderson and Eaton via DQ 3 stars. Back to the formula, Zenk beat Flamingo and Southern ran in and Bagwell made the save. JYD and Josh beat Page and Jack.
Scotty did an interview talking about Pillman's title. Nikita beat Anderson via DQ when Eaton interfered and Rhodes and Windham made the save.
Flamingo pinned Chip the Firebreaker in a good match. Vader debuted the Scorpion Deathlock and wouldn't release it, and all the jobbers came in and they couldn't get him off the jobber until Sting came in, and Vader destroyed Sting as well and put him in the Scorpion until Rhodes, Windham and Nikita made the save.
Bagwell and Zenk beat Flamingo and Southern with Flamingo doing the job. Sting pinned Vader 2.25 stars in the dark match main event.